patriotism, faith, national unity, education, fiscal responsibility, civility, the values that define America. Fascinating stories and talks from America-loving patriots dedicated to preserving freedom, opportunity, and justice. Welcome to the Friends and Fellow Citizens podcast. Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 78, part 1 of Friends and Fellow Citizens. I'm your host, Sherman Tylowski. Thank you all so much for joining me. First of all, special thank you to our Patreon supporters. They are absolutely dedicated to this show and this podcast. I'm truly grateful every single week for all of their support. So thank you all to our Patreon members. If you'd like to become a part of the Patreon community, be sure to check out the link down in the show notes below. And to all those who are our listeners, our subscribers, I want to also express my appreciation to all of you as well. If you would like to subscribe to our email list, check out the link down in the show notes below too. Also, as a quick note, as I mentioned earlier, this is part 1 of our conversation with our special guest today. If you want to access part 2, it is also down in the show notes below. So we got a lot of resources down there. This was recorded one entire block, but I wanted to make it a little easier for you to consume, so I split it into 2 roughly equal parts. So check out part 2 after you listen to this part 1. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this interview. Today's guest is Dr. Elida Dakoli. Born in Communist Albania, she overcame the political persecution of her family to become an international concert pianist, entrepreneur, and human rights activist. She has performed on some of the world's most prestigious stages, including Carnegie Hall, Mercken Concert Hall, Brahms Saal, Rathaus, and Bösendorfer Hall in Vienna. Dr. Dakoli left Europe to pursue her graduate degree at Baylor University in Waco, Texas, just down the road of Highway 6 from my previous alma mater, Texas A&M, and subsequently earned her Doctor of Musical Arts in Piano Performance degree from Louisiana State University. Dr. Dakoli has also written her first book called Alexander Pechi, Albanian Music Before and After the Iron Curtain. It was published in 2018 by Academica Press. In this book, she analyzes the works of composer Alexander Pechi and the changes in his compositional style during and after communism. She describes the music during communist regime as well as the influence of folklore in today's Albanian music. As an entrepreneur and educator, Dr. Dakoli has championed an entrepreneurial approach to artistic careers as the founder and professor of the Entrepreneurship in the Arts program at Dallas Baptist University, where she also serves as a member of the Women's Auxiliary Board. She's also the executive director of the Dallas Institute of Musical Advancement, which she founded in 2017, an after-school music program offered at the most elite Dallas schools. In recent years, she's collaborated with the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, VOC, which, by the way, is one of my favorite organizations. They do so amazing work, and most important, they tell us amazing stories that I think are very inspiring and just very well told by some of the country's best speakers. She's collaborated with VOC to advocate for human rights through her music and lectures. On June 12, 2018, Dr. Dakoli appeared as a speaker and performer at the opening of the Memorial of Victims of Communism Foundation's Free to Be exhibition in Washington, D.C. Dr. Dakoli's interview and performance appeared in 40 different countries around the world through Voice of America and the BBC. Most recently, Dr. Dakoli has joined the National Advisory Council of the VOC and successfully appealed to the Texas Congress to pass legislation commemorating the victims of communist regimes. A documentary about her life and the persecution her family faced under the Albanian communist regime was recently produced and released by this foundation. She's also the founding ambassador of the VOC's new Dallas Commission. Dr. Dakoli currently resides in Dallas, Texas, with her husband and 3 children. As you can tell, she is truly an accomplished speaker and human rights advocate. I am really, really grateful to have her on the program today. Elida, thank you so much for joining us on Friends and Fellow Citizens today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone.
Elida, you have truly an amazing story because you came from one of the most oppressive regimes, not just in the history of politics, but in the history of humanity. And you were able to embark on such a journey to come all the way here to the United States and to become so successful and advocate for goodness. What you're doing in the great state of Texas is truly wonderful, and I am just so looking forward to hearing your story today. To start off, what can you tell us about what life was like under the brutal communist regime in Albania?
You said amazing story. Unfortunately, it is amazing. Not by choice. Not that we try to become that way. It's just that communism wanted so badly to make my family, by both sides, my father and my mother, disappear that once that the communism went down and the truth came out, it became something that it's worth mentioning and guiding the younger generation towards the danger that the communism, the socialism brings in the world. Growing in communism, I have to say I had a very happy childhood because I was well protected from my family. In the house, I was a very happy child. I saw very lovely parents, grandparents. I was surrounded by love, and that's what built someone up for success. And I didn't understand what was, what my family was going through. They would put a happy face, a smiley face, a loving face, and everything was just perfect in my little world. Of course, there were things that that later on I was able to understand that I can't believe to begin with what my parents have gone through to just protect us and make all that happen, because they were under pressure the whole time. They were being watched the whole time. They would wake up at 5 a.m., getting us dressed, preparing a little, trying to figure out the most minimal parts of, just having food on the table, just because communism didn't give you much. There was not much food. There was not much, even milk. There was no milk, no honey, nothing. Basically, the minimum was missing. The minimal things of life were missing. However, I felt like I had the whole world just because of the family that I had and the way that they grew up themselves, because that's the way that they grew up as well. Unfortunately, many things later on, once that communism went down and once that I started writing my book, I realized that so many things that I thought back then was my fault. I was not good enough for in different aspects in life in my childhood. It's because of my so-called bad biography. With all of this being said, I was born in a family of two parents that were persecuted from communism. On my mother's side, my great grandfather was one of the founders of the first Albanian Pluralist Congress in 1921. Unfortunately, in 1943, Albania was going through many changes because of the fascism, the Italians. The Second World War was going on, and so a new Albanian Congress was created. And my great grandfather was invited to speak there. Of course, he was the oldest member of that Congress. He was a congressman there as well. And sadly, he was shot while walking the street with my grandfather going to eat lunch at home. Was shot, and 2 bullets, one in the head, one near the eye. He was shot while walking in the back. Of course, they would hit you from the back, right? What did you expect? And while he turned his head to see who hit him, another shot came his way. My grandfather, after communism, I we asked questions when communism fell. We asked questions, what happened? And I very clearly remember him saying that, I don't know how those shells didn't get to me, because the moment that my great-grandfather fell down on the floor, he was trying to figure out if he was still alive or not. There was blood everywhere, and the shots were still going on. Anyway, he grabbed my great-grandfather in his back. My grandfather got my great-grandfather in his back and took him straight to the hospital. At the hospital, they kept him for a few days in the city of Durrës, where the city that I was born in, and then they moved him in Tirana, in the capital city. He started getting better. However, unfortunately, a corrupted nurse, maybe she was pressured to do that, gave him milk that was poisoned, and that's how he passed. He died basically from poison. Unfortunately, there were guards there at the door, because there were guards at the door, and a family member was always with my great-grandfather there. However, they were able to somehow finish their mission, the communists. And it's a very sad story. And what tells me, what I learned from this is that no matter what, they're going to get their way. So don't allow them from the start. Just try to build a wall against communism, because they're going to penetrate somehow their way and make things happen. And that was the story of from my mother's side of the family. The persecution went on from that. They say that communism persecution lasts for 3 generations, and in my case was for more than that. And thank God that communism went down. Otherwise, I'd not be here speaking with you today. This is the story of my great-grandfather. My grandfather and my grandmother suffered in communism. All of their properties were taken away. They were considered enemies of the people. In the street where he was shot was written in a plaque, "The enemy of the people was killed here," with his name. We were not allowed to have a picture of my great-grandfather at home. We were not allowed to mention his name. I never heard about him until communism went down. The reason that I didn't hear about him is because my parents, my grandparents were protecting us. My uncles, my aunts were protecting us to mention his name, because they didn't want us to mention his name in the street. They didn't want me, my brother, or my siblings, my cousins, to speak about the attorney Hussein Mishketa, because if someone would hear us saying his name, a family member would definitely end up in prison, because they would, with the accusation that they were trying to bring the new generation, the great-grandchildren of this of the attorney, giving them the spirit of the capitalism, growing us up in the capitalist spirit and mindset. However, and so we were not spoken about my great-grandfather, about my family story. I knew nothing until communism went down. And this is very sad. In the house that my great grandparents and my grandmother lived, that was taken away. The other property that was still in the city, but by the seaside, Durrës, it's a city that's located in the Adriatic Sea. It's in the Adriatic coast. And that property was destroyed, and the land was, and they took over the land and did whatever they wanted to do. Our homes were all taken. They gave us a small part of a house where we had only the first floor, and in the second floor there were the upstairs neighbors that were from the Secret Service that would live upstairs. They would go through our hallway to go upstairs. Basically, imagine a two-story house. In the first floor was my grandparents and their children, and in the second floor were the Secret Services living. A family that the husband worked at was a policeman, I believe. And on the other side of that house, because right across from our door was another family that reported every single move that my grandparents would make. I remember when I was a child going to my grandparents' house and knock at the door, the neighbor's door right across the street, right across the neighbor's door. They would open the door, they would see who is knocking on the door, and then they would shut without saying hi or anything. Can you imagine living that way? That's how my grandparents lived, and that's how my parents lived. So it was, we were never talked about the system, the communism. Of course, I thought that because we would study in school that there's nothing better than communism, there's nothing better than socialism. I had no idea that the world is so big and so amazing. We just lived our little world and we were not allowed to think outside of it. On my father's side, my grandfather was a very successful businessman. He was known in charity as well as my great-grandfather and my grandfather on my mother's side. So they were people that wanted to do good for their city, for their country. He was, my grandfather, paternal grandfather, had business relations all over the world. And he was known to support the education, as stated by the newspaper at that time. They would donate monthly. My grandfather did this on my father's side, and his father started it. So it was something that went on for generations. When communism came to power, they took my grandfather to prison. My grandmother, with the 4 children, she were thrown in the street. The youngest one was 1 year old, and it's just so sad. They didn't even have time to put on their shoes. They didn't allow them to put shoes on, and just literally the police was there, the military was there. They considered them as well enemies of the people, that they sucked the blood out of the poor people, and they became rich just using the workforce. And now it's time that the workforce gets the power back, and the people that used the capitalists, it's time for them to go to prison and live under the most miserable conditions in the street, if possible. So my grandmother was not allowed to even take, a slice of bread to feed her child. No clothes on. It was cold. No jackets. They were just thrown in the street. I hope you get the point. Thankfully, her brother had a 2-bedroom home, and he had my grandmother move in with him and his family. My grandmother lived in one room there with her 4 children, and that's how it all started. She did the most unusual jobs. The kids started working even at a very young age. My father was working at age 6, 7, selling nuts in the street, almonds. They would bake them and they would sell them, basically just try to make ends meet. My grandfather was in prison at that time. He would work during the day and night. I don't know honestly, I don't know how they treated them, but I do know that the conditions in the prison were super miserable. My father said that all that he had to eat was just soup, that maybe you could find a piece of rice in it, basically literally just water. And they'd slave them, opening new roads and in the mountain, just basically the most miserable jobs. That my grandfather was at that point was 60, and they would make him work all those jobs and hit him. I can't even imagine. It's just so hard for me to speak about this, no matter how many times I talk about it, just because I can't imagine that someone that did so much for their city would just suffer under these conditions, to go through all this for doing nothing, just trying to do good for his family. for his country and most importantly for his city, and try to build the city, try to build the country. With all this, my grandmother would send yogurt pretty much weekly, or as much as she was allowed to go to prison, because they would move him from one prison to another. And oftentimes we didn't know where it was. And oftentimes my grandmother couldn't walk all the way. Even she couldn't walk for, let's say, 5 hours or 7 hours to just send some yogurt. We didn't know where my grandfather was. There was no transportation. Even if there was a bus, they couldn't afford to go into one to pay the ticket. That's how poor they were. And it was just so bad that I don't know how to describe it. My father went and visited. My grandmother would always take one of the children to visit my grandfather. And what my father remembers is just his father looking just in the worst possible condition. Then that's what he remembers, his father. He remembers his father dirty with, just uncleaned, with very dirty, ruined clothes, and just still smiling somehow, but completely gone in the inside. My father says that he always had the hope that this will be over soon. However, unfortunately, it did not happen. It was communism were able to keep power for 45 years. Eventually, when they didn't need my grandfather anymore, they took all of our money. A lot of our homes were destroyed for what they called archaeological reasons, hoping that they'll find gold under the house, because back then that's how people would save, would save their wealth. So the houses were destroyed. I know that one of my grandfather's friend that was able to survive prison made his way out after communism, reached out to us, said that you have some bank accounts in Switzerland. I advise, I know this from your father, told that to my father. And so we did that research. However, everything was taken. The Communist Party made my grandfather, probably drugged him, gave him who knows what they did, but basically made him sign that all the money will be taken or transferred to the communists. So everything was taken. They did everything. And once that they didn't need him anymore and he was too weak to work, they poisoned him as well. They didn't let us know that he was dead. My grandmother kept sending yogurt to prison, and one day the guard told my grandmother, "Don't come back again. He no longer exists." And that was it. That's how we find out that was the end. We didn't know where his grave was. To this day, we don't know. And it's just the only time I remember my grandmother speaking about this. At the end of her life, she said that I can see him. He's coming. So I'm finally going to be with my husband again. And that was it. She passed after that. So, oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
No,
and
it's okay.
It's just hard to speak. Anyway, so, I apologize.
No need to apologize. I thank you so much for sharing what your family has contributed to the people of Albania. I just can't begin to imagine what your grandparents and great grandparents went through. It's truly sad. Elias, I'm listening here. You really, you're so brave to share your story. I mean, hearing your story about your great grandparents, your grandparents, and all the struggles that they went through, it's unimaginable.
No, I started learning more about all this as again, my parents. It took them. It was such a huge effort for them to just make us feel as we had the whole world. That's how I felt. I had the whole world. However, I didn't have much at all. I realized that I had so little, but I just had that love that my parents were determined to give us. And I think that's what built us for life, me and my brother and my cousins, because it was the same. And once the communism went down, I saw this joy in my family and this motivation that now it's our time to take things back, to have freedom back, to just build this country named Albania, and where it was, and take it to the next step what our grandparents, the previous generations, tried to do so much. And it was not easy. It was not easy at all, because what communism did is that it ruined it for, it's been 30 years now, and it's still hard. They're still going through a transition, a big transition, I would say, for many reasons. One of them being that the communists are still in the power. It's not just them, it's their children. And they're still so strong there. And that is what makes me so sad. And that is something that I don't think it's just in Albania, but it's changing all over the world. And we know about China, what's going on, and the strength that they have, and how can we make it to where, how can we win against it? How can freedom, democracy win against, communism, totalitarianism? And because you call socialism, it's the same thing. I always think of what Karl Marx said, is socialism is just the bridge between, don't quote me on that, but the idea is that the socialism is the bridge between capitalism to communism. And sadly, that's where we are right now. But going back to my family's history, my grandmother did the most odd jobs, and yet she was so brave to just, she would speak about the grandfather. When we had a family gathering, she would always say, "Oh, I feel like he's here with us." I always asked, "But how did he die?" And she said that he got sick and he passed. I never knew the real story until communism went down, basically, in democracy. We were not able to speak about our family members. That is how sad this all is. She was not allowed to speak about religion. My grandfather, by my father's side, both sides of the family. But I lived with my paternal grandmother, and she and I would sleep in the same room, would share the room, and she would wait for me until I would fall asleep, and then she would start praying every night. But sometimes, I wasn't asleep yet, or I'd wake up and I'd ask, "What are you saying? What are you doing, grandmother?" And Yaya was her name, and she would just tell me, "Oh, I'm talking to myself." And then the next morning I'd say, "Oh, Daddy, Mommy." And Nana, I call her Nana. Nana was talking to herself again last night. And they're like, "Oh, she does this a lot. Just ignore her. Don't tell your friends that she talks to herself." Because they were always so scared, because they're going to think that your grandmother is not okay, And my grandmother said, "Yes, I like to do that. Forgive me, but I remember praying to, dear God, help my children, give them strength. I still remember it was the same praying every single night. And during the holidays, she would, religious holidays, she would give us money. And she'd say, "Here, this is for you, this is for you." And we're like, "Why? Why is this money? Why are you giving it to us?" She's like, "It's my birthday." And then we was like, "You just had your birthday. Is your birthday twice a year?" She's like, "Yes, I don't remember." And so we're like, "Oh, look, Nana gave us money. This is her birthday." But her birthday just passed, a few months ago. And my parents again would say, "Oh, she doesn't remember. Just take the money and let's go and buy something." let's go and buy a cookie or something like that. So yes, basically she was not allowed to. None of my family members, no one was allowed to talk about religion or believe in God. And if that happens, they would end up in prison. So it was everything. You just had to be so careful. If you say that, oh, we don't have lemons, they're missing. Why don't we have rice at home? Or how can there be no meat at the stores? Just, so we can eat our chicken or fish. We live by the Adriatic Sea. How come we don't have fish in the store to buy? Then that was the end of that person, of its family, and its future generations. So it was a tough life, I have to say, a very tough life. Many things that you asked me the question, what life for me as Elida during communism? I said that it was a very happy childhood. However, like I said at the start, there were things that I thought it was my fault, and my parents trying to shelter me from one thing would just tell me that, yes, perhaps you need to do better. For example, I say, why am I not part of this, group that is going to be on TV? And there was just, please understand, there was just one channel, one TV station, one TV station, and the TV would be from 6 p.m. until 10 p.m. We had news 3 times. Once or twice a week you could watch a movie, and the rest was programs for the party. There was some kids shows, and so they had this show where different schools will go through a little competition, for example, 2 schools, science competition, math competition, and I was never a part of it. And I'd ask, why am I not? If my class is going there, why am I not part of it? Am I not a good student? However, they didn't want me as Elida to be a part of it because I was the daughter and the granddaughter and the great-granddaughter of 2 of the worst people that Albania could bring of, even though they tried to bring the best, to build a country. So, yes, and my parents were like, well, maybe you need to study harder. You need to study more. So next time you are there, and I always thought that, oh, perhaps I'm not good enough for this, or different, concerts that I had to perform in let's say in the capital city or things like that. Why am I not a part of it? Why wasn't I invited to this or to that? But I was never good enough. And my parents would say that they're happy with what I have achieved. However, I need to work much harder to make it to the top. And one time I remember my mother, I still can't forget that, where she said, you need to study. I'm like, but I'm doing well at school. She said, you are doing well at school, but you need to be the best of the best of the best. You need to be number 1 in order to at least get a college degree, because if you are the top of the top of the top, maybe you will achieve something. But something, with achieving something was basically getting a job, getting an education, because she said something that I will never forget, because you have a bad biography. And as a child, as an 8-year-old, 7 or 8-year-old child, I'd ask myself, what does that mean, having a bad biography? I asked, but I also was like, I remember asking, but at the same time, I felt that, okay, if I ask, I don't want to open having a bad biography, I thought maybe it's my fault. I'm not good. And now this bad biography, I'm creating it. I didn't know what exactly it meant. I think it came out of my mother in a moment of frustration. But, I said, what does that mean? She said, just try to be the best that you could be, and don't worry about the rest. And I never asked anymore I did think about that, though. I never thought that it was coming from my grandparents and great-grandparents, because we never talked about that. And if I asked questions, I was, very sweetly shut down, or the conversation would change. So that was a childhood in Albania.
Wow. I mean, I can't even begin to fathom, how much courage you received just from going through, the struggles already, the daily struggles of not being able to get even basic necessities. And then for people to judge you based on such a false depiction of of your family, it's unimaginable, because we all often, I think a lot of people, generally speaking, always want to find out what the next frontier is for themselves. They want to be the best that they can be. And for people to, in that society, to tell people that they can't even, or they might not even be able to achieve because of their family history or their beliefs and all that, it's just
Well, they didn't want, because of the family history, they didn't want this the children, the grandchildren, and the great grandchildren of they knew what kind of brain these people had. How my great grandfather spoke, I believe, 7 or 8 languages. So he was very well, very, very sharp. My great grandfather by my father's side, he was, he was the brain of the country. He was one of the leaders. They didn't want their children to be successful. Something will be there, the gene will continue. And they didn't want that. They didn't want anyone that was related to my great grandfather family bloodline to be successful. Didn't want them to have the smallest chance of making it happen. My mother was extremely smart, and during the time that she graduated from high school, if I talk about her life in high school and my family's, my uncles and my father's and my aunt's high school life, it's just so hard. And it will take us hours and hours and hours. That would be something for perhaps a different time. But once my mother graduated from high school, there was a big need for doctors and for teachers. So my mother fortunately went to med school. However, first year, someone wanted to take her. The communists said, "Why did you really put this person in med school? How come she is going to become a doctor?" So they wanted to take her out. Someone we didn't know. My mother didn't know anything. However, some person that worked in that was one of the leaders in the university, of course, connected to the Communist Party. Then she said, "This young lady or young woman has so much potential that would be absolutely impossible. We will not allow this to happen." So she protected my mom. She defended my mother without knowing my grandparents, without knowing anyone in the family. Of course, she knew the family's history, but she said it would be a crime if we take her. We don't allow her to study math. We need people like her no matter what. Keep watching her, but she needs to finish this school. And that's what happened. And that lady, actually, that once that my mother graduated, she was my mom's patient until the day that she died. We later learned this story. She told my mother, once my mother was, had children and so on, she said that, yes, this is what happened. And of course, my mother was as thankful as one could be, but she didn't know what happened, the story. Unfortunately, no one came up for my uncle that carried the name of my great grandfather. So her brother, Hussein Mishketa, carried his grandfather's name. So, and he was extremely bright child. When he was in high school, second year high school, teachers, if a teacher was missing, they would have him take over the class and teach that class, even for older students. So he went to ended up studying mechanical engineering the first year. And then on the second year, they told him that he's no longer allowed in the university. And he did the most odd jobs. And the rest of the children, my mother still has 2 sisters and 2 brothers. So the rest of the family, the younger brother and the younger sister, didn't get a college degree. And I can tell you so many stories, but it's not worth going there. But they were disrespected in the middle of the school. Many things were told to them that they should not even get a high school education. People should not be around them because they are the stream blood of the Enver Hoxha, an enemy of the people. Can you imagine someone telling that to a child? Not only high school, but even middle school. They would just try to put them down any possible way that they could. My uncle, the Enver Hoxha that carried his grandfather's name, said that Elida, deep down, I believe that they were scared of us. They were scared of the name. They were scared of anything that was related to us. No, and that made them, because they were so scared of us, somehow, even though we had no power, no power to do a thing, they would try to put us down in so many ways. And, with on my father's side, of course, he has to go through so much because he just had a mother, and the income was, and with younger siblings, there was not much income coming to the house. So my father had to work and go to school and take care of his younger sibling. And my aunt helped my grandmother with odd jobs, and my older uncle became and when I say older, is 12, 13 years old. So he became the man of the house, if I may say, and he was working at night, in the evening, night, and then going to school until 8th grade. And then he did the night school and worked during the daytime so he could somehow support the family. And when I say work, just the most awful jobs that no one would want to do, but for so little money, but at least they could have, a slice of bread and a little bit of food to have to send to their father in prison, because prison basically gave them nothing. So it was very tough, and they didn't want them to get educated because they didn't want these people to be educated, So yeah.
Understood. And I just want to make one point before we wrap up our first part of our conversation, and we're going to break real quick, and we're going to get to part 2. We'll have part 2 available down in the show notes below, as I mentioned earlier on. I just want to recognize how giant the mission is for the United States to ensure we have a society that can mitigate and prevent prejudice. Because this is what it is. When I see that in communist societies, one can't work hard and pursue what he or she wants to pursue in life because of these prejudices, because of the fact that someone comes from a particular family, from a particular class, or from a particular ethnicity, or did something in their lives but can't have redemption. When I see that kind of society, I'm really concerned that our civilization or our Western world will drift towards that. We cannot have that. We have to have a society where people can freely express themselves and where we can have security and liberty. These are the real core values of our country. And I just hope that in part 2 and in future conversations, when we have people who've gone through what you've gone through, I hope that we'll have some serious reflection on the importance of coming together here in America to pursue things that are bigger than ourselves and that are going to be very, very significant for the success and the liberty and the freedom and the opportunities for future generations. Thank you so much to Dr. Dakoli for a wonderful part 1 of her story. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this first part of episode 78. We're going to continue this story with part 2, so check out the link down in the show notes below. We'll see you very soon in part 2.